Hey everyone, welcome to 21st Century Saints live stream and podcast series. We are here tonight with me, Jane Christie, my co-host, Alana Wilson-Bryce. You want to say hey?
Hey everyone.
And Peter Blakely of Mormon Civil War has made time to come and chat with us tonight. Do you want to say hey, Peter?
Hello,
Peter,
it's a pleasure to be here.
Peter has a sore
I was screaming with
throat.
joy so much I've gone husky and lost my voice.
So in our house it would be Texilix. Do you need your Texilix? Your little spoon of
I need
medicine?
something.
Yeah.
Lynn's
a little spoon
making
of
soup.
Texilix. Oh, that's sweet. Lynn will take care of everything. Okay.
But she has gone to TK Maxx to shop first.
Is it shopping night? Awesome. I don't know. Do you know I'm feeling pretty wrung out? We've had a busy weekend, guys. We've already spoken on Nemo's podcast about what was going on Sunday. So remind our audience, what was happening on Sunday again? Who wants to?
So Sunday was a broadcast to all of Europe by President Nelson and Apostle David Bednar and their wives, who both spoke as well. And as always, Wendy Nelson was the gift that keeps on giving crazy. So we're going to be discussing her talk in itself possibly tomorrow.
So Alana missed it live,
yeah.
and I've been getting such a kick out of watching moment by moment. You realise the horrific, how bad it was. I get such a kick out of Alana discovering it and the facial reactions. Yeah. It is brilliant.
Obviously, without saying what it is, because we're going to discuss it tomorrow. I was saying to Jane the other night that I actually, when she said something, I actually had to pause it and hit the double tap to skip back to re-listen and make sure that I had heard her correctly. Because I was like, no, she didn't say that. There's no way she said that.
Guys, PD is, I think, lurking in the atmosphere. And I want to share this because PD's like, can we talk about the very bad thing? And I was like, this is so bad. No, this is really, really bad. And when I told sort of Alana, when I told my son and my husband, literally hands to mouth, horror. And it was completely innocent, but just it was a car crash. So we're gonna, if you want to find out, if you didn't get to watch Wendy's talk, we are going to be talking about it tomorrow night with Nemo on his channel. So stay tuned.
And we're going to play the whole thing.
But we hope it's innocent.
You'll hear 15 minutes.
Absolutely. Okay, so there's that. So we've got that tomorrow night. But on Saturday night, Alana and I spent our Saturday night. Okay.
What is wrong with me?
If
I had to look back with you, I think that would be my Saturday night, sit and listen to a church, Europe, family thing. I would have said, not in a month of Sundays.
We did it for you guys. We did it because so that you didn't have to, so that we could say, yeah, it was as bad. You know, Alana, did we have any high hopes about this?
We were actually thinking we were going to be shocked and horrified by the things that they were saying. Like, I was so set up to be like raging and be like, no, how dare you say that? But it actually wasn't. It wasn't. There was a few things, obviously, that you were like, don't know, But it was nothing that made me, raging.
A lot of things to make you angry at some point, but I think we were so surprised by some of the things that were said that, So we're going to talk about that. But first of all, so this was billed as a Euro seminar for spring 2022, and it was all online. It was all on Zoom. The European family, a religious ideal in a shifting society. Now, that title alone was enough to make me feel deep concern, because, the church and family, it's their thing, right? And then when I read the little sort of, what we were going to be talking about, I'm going to quote, the demographic landscape of our Western society has changed dramatically in the 25 plus years since the publication of the family, a proclamation to the world. Join our upcoming panel seminar where we want to learn from international scholars and first-hand experiences what the implications of crumbling family values have on our society. We want to discover how we can uphold the family as the highest value while at the same time not being tolerant of the fallout around us. Okay, so do we want to share any thoughts on expectations based on that?
I just think it's this narrative of the Mormon Church will be the last people who know how to do families properly, and it's all crumbling. Everything's going horrifically wrong. The world out there is like this carnage of everyone abandoning their children and being selfish, which is what you'd think from a lot of general authority talks, and so on. It's complete nonsense, of course. You know, in many ways, families have been far healthier than ever before. People still want to get married. You know, more. I think it's still a majority of people get married. In the 80s, some data went around a lot about, you know, more than 50% of people get divorced, which is actually not accurate, I think. You know, marriage has kind of stabilized. And I think certainly the significant progress for women that's occurred still even in recent decades has meant a lot of those family lives and marriages are much healthier than they used to be, because they used to be very much based on women suffering, putting up with abuse and violence and doing most of the work. I'm assuming that's bad. And so you know, I think there's so much that's better. And Dieter Uchtdorf's been the only apostle to be positive of the world, to actually talk in General Conference that poverty is reducing, education and literacy are going up, freedom, women's rights, all kinds of things are significantly progressing at the moment. So I think, you know, I, like you, I was expecting this car crash between the real world and this idea, and also focusing on the European families. So it's a focus on what is our experience here in Europe.
Yes.
Because a lot of the more ultra conservative American Republicans or conservatives, whatever you want to give members of the church, kind of assume we're all going to hell in a handbasket because we've given up on the family and legalized gay marriage first. And so it must be awful here. And we're, you know, the family life around us is collapsing. And families have always had difficulties, but I'm a teacher at secondary school. I get to see the teenage boys of thousands of families.
Yeah.
It's no worse than it's been.
Oh, sorry.
Alana,
I was just going to say, you know, without going into detail, it's funny when you said, you know, about, you know, people are still wanting to marry, like not according to Spencer James, like from the notes that I've got here.
Yeah,
that wasn't what he was saying. So
yeah,
we're going to
come back and discuss the meat of what was said. We unfortunately, and I'm so sorry, we didn't manage to get this recorded. But we
not from the want of not trying. We did try.
Are you? You're going to get me battered. That is.
I said we
and scandalous.
I said we. I didn't say you. So you just dobbed yourself in because I just realised people probably not know what that word means.
So we did catch some screenshots of the slides that were used. But you know, whenever we're talking about the theme of families, it's something that there's been a lot of tension for me. First of all, in that little spiel about what was going to be discussed, we're talking about the family proclamation, of course, was mentioned straight away, which concerns me. Already, I feel like we're going to have problems. And then, you know, in the second paragraph, it's talking about academics. We're going to be hearing from academics. Now, I respectfully would submit that academia and the family proclamation don't necessarily, for me, sit in harmony together. I think there's a lot of problems with the family proclamation, and I just was sort of dreading seeing potential academia shoehorning things into a very narrow view of what family life looks like. Now, when I converted to the church, it was just me. My family weren't interested, and fine. Currently, I am the only active member of my family, and that's great. I love it. I love being able to, know that my husband isn't going to have to be gone from me every Sunday while he manages a ward, and that my husband is mine and my family's, and I don't have to share him with the tremendous amounts of service that Latter-day Saint men just sign up for. But also there is that tension and that pain of what eternally we are expected to look like, and that should be happening here. So while there are lots and lots of supportive comments and views that get shared, often they're so piteous. It's like, oh, it's okay if you're doing really, really well because you're here, and that's all that matters. And the rest of it will come. With just coming from this place of it's kind of patronizing when I don't feel broken, when our family aren't broken. Also, my view of what I would like my eternity to look like is complicated. I don't long for eternal motherhood. I do have messy feelings about what family looks like. So yeah, tension. Alana, could I get you to come in just now with, you had shared some thoughts in the chat during the discussion. Could you share what it was that you were feeling about family?
About being a single parent in the church, do you mean?
Yeah.
So I just said in the chat, that as a single parent within the church, I felt very alone and very left out. I feel that, you look around and a lot of the people, and I don't deep down believe that it's necessarily intentional, but I think just because you're not in that typical, I suppose, ideal family of being married and having your child, I just felt I wasn't really included. You would see, one example, without mentioning any names, my mum and dad had been invited to household, and Daisy had, and I thought because it was my mum and dad, it was all going to be the older ones, and when Daisy had called my mum, she didn't realise my mum was at this house, and obviously she showed round everybody so they could say hi to Daisy because she was a lot younger. And I just remember seeing quite a few younger couples who were younger than even me, and I remember coming off that call and I cried. I cried because I thought, what is wrong with me that I can't be invited because I'm not married? And again, I'm not saying that's wholly the church's fault, but I feel that the church do have some sort of responsibility in reminding the members, that we have to look after our singles as well with families. I mean, I've said it again, and I don't say this to make Jane, big-headed in, but if it wasn't for having Jane, I don't think I would have survived as long as I did when I went back to church, because there was nothing there for me. There was nothing, because like, when you go back to church, I'm not saying I've completely cut out all of my friends, but due to life experiences and how I felt I allowed myself to be treated by certain friends, I cut them out of my life because they were more harmful than good. I've often thought back to that. If it wasn't for having Jane there as a support system and making me feel included and validating things, I don't know that I would have survived as long as I did before I left church. Obviously, I left church for very different reasons. It wasn't mainly that reason. But I just think, we need to open members' eyes to the fact that there are people there who need to feel included just the same as married couples.
Now, that's actually hugely important because of what we're going to go on to talk about. That when you're talking about as an independent parent, you're handling all of the roles, but you're also having to, for what you feel is the good of your family, you're having to cut out people that would be perceived as potentially not having those same values, a bad influence, something that would take you away from the church. So, and I think it's just worth keeping that in mind with what we discuss. Okay, so we log on. How busy was it that night, Alana? You're the numbers girl.
So I know I love keeping reading with the numbers. So I think the highest, like it started off a little bit low, obviously, then it was building up. So it was like 60 or so when we went on, I think, and then the highest it got to was 140. And then at one point, the numbers started dropping. Quite low, and then obviously when they were going to split off into discussion rooms, and the numbers just down. Loads of people left at the end. So
super important. This is the whole of Europe.
Yeah.
You know, this is a continent, and that's not a lot considering.
I know. I was scrolling through the faces to see if I could see anyone from my ward or my stake that I would recognise. Not a soul.
Again, we're not promoting these things very well at all. It gets mentioned, and if you don't grab it then and there.
Yeah.
Okay, let me show you this. This is the first person who, obviously, I'm not going to bore you guys with who's presenting and praying. First prayer was a woman, which is always of note. But let me show you guys this. The first speaker, I don't know if you guys can see that. Alana, do you wanna tell? My eyesight is awful, people. Alana, what are you seeing?
So this is Spencer James, and he had his pronouns listed, which was quite a shock to see for someone who's a church member.
Now, Spencer James, just to give you a bit of bio, is an associate professor of family life and Africana studies, affiliate at Brigham Young University. His research focuses on global family relationships and how those relationships influence the well-being of children, adolescents, and adults. So that, I can tell you, is the first time on a church. It wasn't a church thing, right? It was a BYU seminar, but it was, very much sort of
hand in hand with the church. Absolutely, they were talking about.
It's the first time I've seen anyone list their pronouns. What the hell?
And then she had me looking through everybody else's names to see if anyone else had their pronouns up, and I was like, no, only you and him. That's it.
I would love to see that happen more. Sorry, Peter, on you go.
Well, it's a step forward, isn't it? Someone has to start it and make it normal. So you have to begin somewhere. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think we have kind of had a wake up call in that the apostles finally admitted, I think 2 separate apostles in the last conference or the one before, that more than half of the adults in the church are not married currently. So they're either single or divorced. And then they admitted that this has been the case globally or internationally outside the USA since the early or mid 1990s. But recently, American Latter-day Saints have just crossed that threshold a few years ago. So it only counts really as a problem when the Americans are having it, of course, as usual. But they're kind of there. But doesn't it, if you think of what my wife Lynn went through, I've married 2 single mums so far, so I know all about the grief they've been through as single parents in the church. And what Alana's described, excuse my huskiness, my voice has gone shouting at
You're adorable.
today.
Keep
He's
going.
got his sexy voice on tonight. That's what we say.
Extra naughty. So, but can you imagine what a different experience you would have had, my wives would have had, so many people would have had, if as soon as that threshold was crossed, more than half of our adult members are divorced or single. If that had actually been talked about, made part of the training, acknowledged formally, rather than this endless idea that we can only ever talk about the nuclear family ideal, going to the temple and having babies, which is still what the apostles are pounding repeatedly and repeatedly to the young people. What if that had been consciously been allowed and normalized as something to consider and talk about? How might people's language and priorities have changed significantly? When we all could see it in our own wards, you could look around and see that only a small percentage of the families here are actually living this Mormon ideal. And instead of just embarrassing and shaming everyone else and patronizing and pitying them, to have actually perhaps made much more effort to focus on what really matters in the long run for healthy people and healthy families and relationships and healthy parents, and and come up with narratives of things going well that include those models and those possibilities. But we know very specifically who killed that, if it was ever going to happen. That Boyd K. Packer in the early 90s gave a talk to a presentation to the All Church Coordinating Committee, which was the first presidency and the presiding bishopric and the apostles. And in it, and you can find it online, which is amazing. I think it was 1993 or something. It's just before he went after the September 6th. And he described receiving these letters from three demographics who were suffering in the church: a gay man, an intellectual or an academic dealing with finding out about the church history problems, and a mother, a woman who was in an abusive marriage and was trying or had left it and eventually, but all the time being pressured by her local leaders to go back to a violent husband. And he acknowledged receiving these letters of these people powerfully expressing their pain, and he quoted paragraphs. But then he said, we cannot talk about these people from the pulpit. We cannot, these people who are not following this ideal pattern, we must minister to them in private and give them comfort and consolence, but we cannot be seen to be not holding the line for absolutely you mustn't be gay. Absolutely, you must, as a mother, not be a working mother. You must stay in the home and you, if necessary, stay in an abusive relationship is the implication. And
Peter, you're
academics,
going to love
I'm about
what's
to kick them
coming
out of
up
the church.
next. Yeah, you're going to
Yeah.
love this.
Can I just
So
quickly jump in?
that's like the tone. Yeah.
Yeah,
Alana?
Just going back to, you're talking about, with the ideal, nuclear family, going back to, being at the temple. That's something, again, that I really struggled with. I get what the church teaches about, marriage between a man and a woman, but, I left the church. I was in a relationship with my daughter's dad. It didn't work out. After about 6 months of Daisy's life, I realised I had to walk away. And obviously that's something that, Jane, will tell you, that I really struggle with, that, again, because I'm not married, I can't get my daughter sealed to me. Now, I now don't believe that I have to. I don't believe that anymore, that I have to be sealed. But at the time, it was really, really difficult for me because I felt I was being penalised, for... I don't know, I get the whole, to an extent, marriage between a man and a woman so you can be sealed together. But I'm thinking, what about the people who have had kids outside of marriage or have had kids within a marriage? Well, I suppose if they're in the church, they'll have been sealed anyway. But for me, who, I don't know if I'm ever going to get married. I don't know what's down the line for me. But it's like... And people come away with these catty comments of, but it'll all be sorted in the next life, don't worry about it. Well, I am worrying about it. I hate when folks say that, and I know they mean the best when they say it, but it's like, that's just... See, I'm not good with words. That's just one of these throwaway... But I'm trying to think how I want to word this. Like, one of those throwaway comments. Yeah, don't worry, it'll all be sorted out in the next life. No, pal. You be in my situation.
Let me push this on a
then
little,
worry
guys.
about it.
So these are a couple of questions that had come up. Alana, could you give us an audio version of this? Could you perhaps read that out for us?
I'm just trying to make sure. Is this a
So
more divorce
these were
one?
some questions that really just as sort of thought points that Spencer James had shared. We didn't discuss them. He just sort of put them out there.
Yeah, I think that slide you've got up's the one that's talking about that there's more divorce and stuff like that.
So it talks about contemporary family
trends. So it says
trends.
contemporary family trends in many European countries. More divorce, less marriage, foregone versus delayed, fewer children, smaller families, more cohabitation, more lone parents, far more aging. No, is it?
Yep.
Yeah. And female employment.
Now that was all
oh my gosh.
huge. You just spend a little bit of time. Yeah, it changed the face of what marriage looked like and what the family looked like in Europe. And I just, we don't often, hear about that. We then went on to have a look at fertility trends. I'm just going to leave that up for a second. As you can see, it's kind of plummeting. Then we went on to have a look at, this is the divorce trends. Again, divorces going up. And Alana, can you remember what the point of this one was?
This was, so down the left-hand side was all the different countries and things like that, if I remember right. My screenshot's not even that great either. I'm trying to zoom in. So it was, I think it was just a graph on the number of children, I think possibly like within a marriage, single parents, I think just things like that. But I thought I took a better screenshot than that, but I haven't.
So really the point that he was making in this is that people in relationships are decreasing. That marriage and family is a sort of universal thing. Pair bonding is a universal thing. That it's how, it's social organization, and it's looked different for different areas at different times. And he covered a little bit of that. So it was, it was a fairly interesting.
He did say that fewer teenagers were dating. That was one of the things I noted down. He said fewer teenagers were dating. And fewer people were getting married. Fewer people, numbers were decreasing, he said.
Okay, we're going to move on to what would become the highlight for me, my star speaker. In fact, sorry, Alana, before we move on to him, do you want to quickly cover those questions? Again, just thought questions that Spencer James had shared.
Yep.
Have you got those?
Yeah, I've got them in front of me, yep. It says, is it possible or desirable to unify around a single family type? How should faithful members of the church react to family change? How does family and other types of social change influence opportunities to form families? How does the European family compare to and contrast from the ideal family as taught by church leaders? You want me to read the next slot as well, yeah?
And then the next slide, we're going to get you just to read those out.
How will differing and changing family norms and forms across European countries change individual members' reactions to those changes? Should church members have the same type of families across all of Europe despite differing family patterns? How do socioeconomic, did I get that right?
Yep.
Status and gender figure here?
Okay, so we've a lot we could talk about there, and we will, but I want to quickly move us on to the wonderful speaker who is Wouter van Beek. He gave an incredible presentation. Now he is an academic. I'm trying to think he's an anthropologist, a university professor of religion at, now is it Tilburg University? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Anyway, I really, if I could just bottle what he was saying, it was so good, guys. Okay, so he begins here. Alana, could you take us through that slide?
Is that the LDS and marriage one?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, he says, USA churches into institutional void of absent state. LDS temple, one double marriage, civil and ecclesiastical. Temple sealing, eternal marriage. LDS, only a sealing, not a wedding. Problem, crying mums, waiting a year. EU, civil wedding, church celebration, temple sealing. USA now, first civil wedding, then temple sealing. Yet all this came after a marital experiment.
Okay, sorry, I forgot to show that.
I know, I was wondering, that's why I asked you, because I was like, I can't see it.
Okay, so with that slide, Alana, do you want to, will we talk for a little bit about the points he was making in that slide?
We can do.
So, first of all, civil, he's pointing out that civil and ecclesiastical marriage are not the same thing. Yeah. A sealing is not a wedding.
No, he did say that. I wrote that down because that really stuck out to me, because I'd never thought of it that way before. Like, he made that clear. A sealing is not the marriage. He said it's not. He said the wedding is the marriage. He said the sealing is the sealing of the marriage.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I thought, you know, I've never really thought of it that way. And I guess just being in the UK, you know, we had to have the civil marriage before we could go to the temple. That's part of our laws. So I guess I didn't realise, probably until my much older years, that they didn't have that in America. And again, it goes back to the whole, you know, of parents not being allowed, you know, if they're not members of church, to go in to see their kid's wedding because of that. So
if there was a temple in Scotland, we would have the same. There would be no need for the civil ceremony here. So it would be the same. It's some sort of English rules that you know, we have to go down and sort of do that separately, just for your information.
Yeah.
The weddings have to be public. You have to have, the public has to be able to come into the ceremony. Yeah, in England anyway.
And have the right to stop. I object. Yeah, you've got to give people the right to the
She's
drama.
mine.
Exactly. He said Mormons don't do weddings. And what was brilliant about that is there was no judgment call on that. Normally that's the start of, well, you know, we have this higher thing here. We have sealings going on. I'm going to put it back up on the screen, but he used the phrase crying moms. He talked about crying mothers on the temple stairs syndrome.
Yep.
Who couldn't attend temple weddings because they're, for whatever reason, not able to go inside the temple while their children are inside being sealed. And he spoke about that with respect and kindness, and I was bloody thrilled. I'll be perfectly honest. That was huge. So
this has been something we could have taught the Americans all along, is and it's other European countries as well, that they have absolutely screwed up weddings. The Mormons in America destroyed it, and they're only now finally accepting that was a disaster. We had that comment from Maven, so that my understanding is that what happens is you can perform a legal wedding in a temple in America. So they'll do the marriage bit of the service that will be legally recognized, but then they do the sealing ritual. And here we would just do the sealing bit when we go to the temple after being married. A huge mistake they've made all along, if they really care about marriage, and so many American women or women going through that have described their utter disappointment at how short the temple sealing and wedding is, how impersonal often, they often don't know the person marrying them, how it's just over with really quickly, how they may well have their own parents outside unable to come in and feeling awful and all guilt around that. And it's just a massive disappointment. And culturally, I've been really surprised in Utah how little they really do with the wedding, you know. So in Britain, we've got all this ritual and ceremony, walking up the aisle, the reception, the speech by the father of the bride and the groom and the best man. We've got this wonderful, rich experience you can have and a big party, and it's epic. And my two weddings were incredible missionary opportunities, if you want to frame it that way, because I had all my, you know, closest colleagues at work, people I went to school with, as well as members of the church and family, regardless of their membership of the church, all in a Mormon chapel, having a purely positive experience, a wedding. No one's trying to convert them. No one's, you know, they're not sitting through, I mean, it is like a somewhat religious ceremony, of course, but it's not an alien environment. Everyone knows what's going on and why. I mean, it's a fantastic way to bring community together, to build, to really sell the idea of the Mormon family to non-members of the church. And they've just absolutely wasted decades missing this trick of how they could do this in America. And the whole ward rallies round to usually, I mean, both my weddings were somewhat on a shoestring, and amazing, wonderful, kind members of our wards just spent hours decorating the chapel, shifting chairs to come and help. I had 300 people or more at Lynn and my wedding, which was a bit intimidating for her, but amazing. And you compare that to the really very brief, not very spectacular thing. I mean, On the other hand, you can say part of the thing they noted there in that data about European marriage is people leaving it till later. And that's because on average, a marriage here, people spend around 30 grand or something, which is insane, like ridiculously expensive. So the Mormons can do it for cheap. You don't have to hire the venue. People will rally around with the food for a reception, and so on. So most of the expenses that make weddings prohibitive, if we really care about marriage and family and speeding up people not delaying, we should just like offer a wedding service in our chapels. Like, get married, do it for free. You know, here's our building. We're not going to charge you. You know,
what was
maybe,
really
you know,
interesting
it's just
that
having a, yeah.
That Wouter was talking about was that the form of the marriage isn't really that important. So, you know, if we're sort of going back, you know, we've got things like hand fasting, or just, you know, just sort of pairing, just sort of you know, blending your way towards marriage, or you know, the marriage, whether it's civil or whether it's in a church, it's that agreement, it's that pairing, it's part of a community, and that families are you know, potentially involved in that. That when we then talk about a sealing, that is purely ecclesiastical, and the only thing that it does is seal you. Does that make sense? I know that we had some questions in it. Now, not to reduce what the Mormon view of sealing is. That is huge, and that is, you know, the crowning part of the temple, but also that it's not actually marriage. You know, certainly here in Europe.
This is something that Gina Colvin's been speaking about. So she's really interesting, sort of nuanced Mormon, now Community of Christ podcaster in New Zealand. And I was still trying to get my head around, like, how does that work? Because we're told such nonsense about sealings, I found out. But this has been her point, that a sealing is not actually a marriage. And the other narrative that a lot of people who are doing the research into early church history and the origins of our practices and so on are finding is how much it's related to polygamy, and how much sealing is about a man. It's very patriarchal, a man accumulating wives as property. She gives herself to him. Now, I think there were a couple of adjustments in the wording of sealings recently, allegedly to make them a bit less sexist in that sense. So that's something that needs looking at, you know. But I mean, we're in 2020 and 21 when the church finally realized how much they've really messed up on this, and started making it okay to have a civil marriage and then go to the temple, rather than having the punishment of having to wait a year and repent of getting married outside the temple before you can go and be in the temple.
Again, so important about family, but no consideration for the families who can't be there and be part of the wedding.
No.
Well, let me take you guys back to the slides, because
they came to it so late. It's just awful.
We've got some interesting things going on here. You know what you're actually saying. We're gonna, he's gonna cover it. He is wonderful. Alana, do you want to take us through that slide again?
So Europe, marriage, church and state. Historically, close interaction between church and state. Marriage monogamous. What does he mean?
The definition. He was talking
definition.
About the definition.
Okay, I'm like, I can't. So you know what my memory's like. Marriage equals legitimacy. Giving children a father.
Now, just to jump in for 1 second, he also in his presentation made it very clear that society defines marriage, and the church's job is to sanctify that. And I found that really interesting. You know, that it's a society that's defining it, and we feel really concerned about, you know, the fact that society or governments may want to redefine it. That's where the definition comes from, and it's churches who make it sacred. Okay, Alana, do you want to keep going?
Yep. Churches sanctified dominant marriage forum. Then he went on state, civil registration, and then church ritual, wedding, and sanctification.
So we have how many countries are now have civil ceremonies and things like that, civil marriages, same-sex marriages. He pointed out that his country has been celebrating same-sex marriage and civil marriage for 20 plus years, and that there was not any opposition to that, which was really interesting. Okay, Alana, do you want to jump us over to this next slide?
Let's just see.
Oh, that's the one that we've already done, isn't it?
Yeah,
right.
My
Okay,
next one was
Peter.
the picture one. That was the picture one.
This one's for you. Okay. He disappointed me a little bit because he had used this photograph and was sort of saying, oh, this is a lovely photograph. I don't feel the same way.
Family portrait of Joseph F. Smith.
The family portrait of Joseph F. Smith, and yeah, that's them all. Alana, do you want to give us the text, the audio version?
Yep, it says lessons from plural marriage. 1, marriage form equals marriage. I think that's what that says. 2, marriage form has to fit into society. 3, power of definition rests with state. Then there's a wee picture, Utah patriarchs in prison.
Yeah, he was pointing out that that's the elders quorum right there, all meeting. Or the high priest. I don't know, whatever it is then. Peter, you help me out. Thoughts? He had been talking about how the church had this marriage experiment in the beginning. And I really liked, of course it's a marriage experiment, but we're not used to hearing, showing up to a BYU presentation talking about the church experimenting with anything. That was pretty cool. So yeah, thoughts on our polygamous roots? I know it's a big question, but anything you want to jump in with?
I think when the church was campaigning against gay marriage, I was just infuriated at the epic hypocrisy of these LDS prophets and apostles. Most of them descended from those polygamous families. In the arguments they gave against gay marriage or same-sex marriage, they said it was untraditional. They said it was unbiblical or something, or unscriptural. They're obviously, unscriptural. And they said it was like un-American at times. They made it a thing about the culture. And of course, well, what should the culture matter? If we're in the culture of God, it doesn't matter if it's un-American. It doesn't matter what tradition is. And Dalian Oates keeps hammering it, untraditional, not traditional, a traditional family. So the traditions is what these cultures have made up. And polygamy was definitely not legal, not traditional, not American, and all these things. And when I grew up in the church, even from a child, and we talk about how persecuted we were, how awful it was that the poor Mormons couldn't do their un-American, untraditional form of marriage, because that's an affront to their freedom, their free agency, their right to live how they choose. And we were all taught that narrative. So in that story, the Mormons are the victims. We're the outsiders. We're doing the weird stuff. And we demand that mainstream American society leave us alone and let us do that. It's none of their business if we want to be polygamous, do it on behalf of our polygamous ancestors, as it were. And then as soon as they get a cob on about gay marriage, they're using all the arguments precisely that were used against Mormons, against Mormon prophets, against their own ancestors, that we were taught were invalid arguments, because they were against people's freedom to choose how to do their married life. Not a shred of acknowledgement of the fundamental hypocrisy of that. I mean, this was one of the key moments for the deconstruction of my trust in them to even be basically rational, because it was so ludicrously hypocritical. And the only of Mormons of all people, even if we massively objected to gay marriage, the most ethical thing we could ever do is just an embarrassed silence, and not even dare to get on our high horses about that, because we've spent years feeding the paranoia and persecution complex and loyalty of our members on the basis that they were treated badly with exactly the same arguments by the American state. So, that little group on the right in that photo in the stripy jumpers, they're prisoners. They've been arrested. They're in jail for being polygamists. And we present those as martyrs. But now we've become the oppressors. The church piled in to campaign politically, financially, everything against legalizing same-sex marriage. And given if they had their way, those same apostles would put those people in jail. They would for doing that.
Let me take you to this part here, which is where Wouter blows my mind. Okay, Alana, I'm not going to get you to read this out. All I'm going to say is that he commented that the scriptures don't say much about marriage, and he just sort of, shares some information about that. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm going to now have to find out where my slides are. While I find them, he then he refers to the demographic of LGBTQI individuals. He didn't know what the I stood for, which, nobody can be perfect. And it was he had me until then. I thought, you're doing so well, sir. But he asked the question, is the family under threat? Now, Mormons, you all know the answer to that. That has been made explicitly clear in conference talk after conference talk. We know what the response is going to be. Is the family under threat? Definitely not. Wow. Blew me away.
So he actually said those words?
Yep.
Is the family under threat? Definitely not. Because families
and did
exist.
he explain what he meant by that?
Yeah, because families exist and will continue to exist, and
whatever form they do exist. Yep.
Absolutely. Yep. Can I just apologize? My dog is
so
happy that families aren't under threat. He is delighted. But he then goes on. Alana, I'm going to get you to jump in a second, because then he starts talking about this idea of the nuclear family. Is the nuclear family best? He's very respectful, but his answer to that is no. While he talks about the family proclamation defending the nuclear family, he goes back to it takes a village to raise a child. He talks about the drawback of the nuclear family being the burden it places on women, the imbalance of power in raising a child. And what he then does is he points out that if it takes a village to raise a child, the church can be that village. He frames it as an excellent opportunity for the church to do that. Now, what I'm loving, Queen Maven in the comments, I'm just loving what you're saying. And yes, this is problematic. We have trusted our little ones to the church to be that village, and I can't send my child there because they may be harmed by the church's teachings relating to their identity. So many things that we might do differently if we had to do them again, that I can make a choice now about what's acceptable and what's not. So is the church that safe village? No, it isn't. But there's an opportunity there. And that was the point he was making. Alana, go give me what you got.
I was just again, this is just a thought question that I had during when he had said, about, and again, it was a bit of an eye-opener to me, because like anyone who knows me really well knows I'm no scriptorian. I hate to say this, but I hate the scriptures. I hate them. I'm going to be completely honest here. I just don't find them interesting. I think, it's just not in a language that I fully understand, so it just bores me. And when he said, that the scriptures don't say much about marriage, it just made me then start to think, well, why then, if marriage is so important, that we're told it is so important to be married, then why is it not mentioned much in scripture? Like, you know, and again, that's just a thought question. I'm not looking for that necessarily to be answered as such, but it just made me think, so why is it not mentioned much in the scriptures then if it's so important? I mean, I didn't take as much notes as you, Jane, when he was talking about, you know, secular society, nuclear family. I have wrote down that he said it's not an ideal environment to raise a child. Obviously, I didn't really understand what nuclear family meant, to be fair. Again, just terms and things that I'm not used to hearing. And I wrote down that he'd said, we are becoming a lonely society. Can't remember why he said that, but he did say that. But I just think, you know, again,
there are some.
Yep, carry on, Peter.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, you go.
No, go on.
No,
okay.
I'm kind of
I was just going to say on that point. Okay, all right. So I was just going to say on that point that the model that the church really latches onto, this nuclear family with the mother at home and the man out at work, if you research sort of history of society and families, and certainly from the feminist perspective, this is a modern invention. This is something that kind of came in post-war America, suburbia. So in the middle classes, throughout history, women have always worked. Mothers have always worked. If you're in an agrarian society, everyone's out in the fields doing stuff, or you know, the hard work of the farm life, or in factories or whatever. My great grandmother, you know, living as a poor Irish immigrant in the East End of London, was her with a drunken, useless husband, was you know, a great grandmother, my granddad's mum, was doing 3 jobs. She was a washerwoman. She had 11 children. She was working every hour cents, and that was fairly typical working class experience for mothers. And a lot of women were in domestic service until World War I and World War II. Huge percentages of women and young women were employed by the middle classes to do the housework, to enable middle class women to get away from it, because it was. So what changed after World War II was 2 things. First of all, women stopped being willing to work as household servants because they usually had very few rights, no limits on their working hours, and their pay was terrible. And during the wars, they were recruited to run factories and work in the male working environment with predictable salaries, with unions, with rights, with limited working hours. And they were no way going to go back to basically being someone's cheap stuff in their house after that. So women, middle class, particularly women, were suddenly left without the help. And there was often a long gap, about a decade or so, before the labour saving devices kicked in. So after World War I and II, these women suddenly found they had to do all the washing and the cleaning in the house and all this stuff that they'd never had to do full time. And it took over their lives, and it really limited what they could do politically and outside of the home, and financially, and having jobs. Eventually, labour-saving devices kicked in, first in America, so they got straight in there. The post-war experience was they came out of World War II incredibly wealthy and inventing all these washing machines and everything. In Britain, we were still on rations for years. It took another decade or two to kind of match the experience the American housewife was having. Then you have this period where middle-class women have all this leisure time, because you can get the housework done in a couple of hours and you've got the rest of the day. And then you have this whole culture of the home is the manifestation of the woman, that she will be a homemaker. She's going to decorate. She's going to do crafts. She'll have macrame plant pots. She'll do all these things because she has all this time now on her hands. Middle class women, of course. Working class mothers were mostly at work all through this. So, and that is the model that these apostles literally grew up with. We have to remember that Russell M. Nelson married his first wife in the 1940s, not even the 1950s, the 1940s, 30s even, I think, and the other senior apostles. So they are literally, their young experience as young married people is going to Brigham Young University, heavily subsidized by tithing. So they're given a cheap way into middle class lifestyles and careers. It's become normal. They're just continuing to project onto all of us through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, zeros and 2020s now, their experience as middle class, very privileged Americans in suburbia, in Utah, decades ago. And they don't have any other script. They have no other model, and they keep referring to their own experience doing this as if that's what we're all doing. They entirely leave out the working classes. They never talk about a working class model for life. They always assume you're going to meet your spouse at university after doing your mission,
Well,
and that you'll be able to
actually,
afford to marry immediately and have children.
get ready
And
for
this is
this.
something I've been raging about in my podcast.
Oh no, absolutely. But
And it,
here's something
yeah,
super interesting. This, Alana, I'm going to get you to go on reading duty
yeah.
again. Do you want to focus on that top one for a little second?
I'm trying to see what one
So
it is.
it was in Wouter's conclusion slide.
Yep, got it. I just slide a few there. Phased marriages do not harm family formation.
Now, just to clarify, we're talking about the thing that horrifies your bishop and families in church. Do you want to live together for a little while to see,
Ooh.
and then you could get married? Phased marriage does not harm family formation. Alana, give us the next one.
Wider definition of gender does not harm families.
Please listen to that.
Wider
President
definition
Nelson.
of gender does not harm families. Does not.
And then, do you want to read it? Yeah.
Families become nodes in network. Adapt definition of family. Most members are single. Support families, not one specific definition. Look for opportunities. Sanctify. Look,
Yeah.
20. I was like, what does that say? Making people worthy.
And we kind of get the gist of basically what he's talking about is a broader definition of what family looks like. Having whole communities be involved in the family experience, and it sounded quite exciting. And
I hope I'm not jumping on, but it kind of follows on with you talk about. He later on they go into discussion with all of them, and he actually later on goes on to say that he thinks that we, which I'm presuming he means the church, need to do away with the notion of the ideal family. And I was like, yes, well said.
Because when you are given an ideal, if you're not the ideal, then you're not the ideal. I'm not ideal, Alana. You're not ideal, and we are perfect. Our families are perfect, and
He's so sweet.
Now, you may be wondering, while all of this is happening, how is the chat responding? How are all the people who have shown up on their Saturday night? Now, I am respectfully suggesting that people who show up to watch something like this on a Saturday night are either super invested in families or are possibly on the religious extreme end of the spectrum. We were only there for you guys. We were there so that you could have this experience. But yes, there were some people lots of people listening. Many very uncomfortable about the idea. Very uncomfortable with these ideas being presented, and would started to be a little bit of back and forth in the chat of you don't know your scriptures well enough, and this kind of which we could expect.
Like, that's not God's way, blah blah blah, the usual.
Absolutely. And of course we couldn't not have we couldn't have this kind of family discussion and not have the Mormon ideal presented. I don't have the heart to do it, guys, but what I'm going to just do is quickly bring up, this is then what happens. We've got a couple who seemed lovely, charming, returned missionaries, and were sharing their story, having been married for a couple of years, about how to do marriage.
They married in 2016.
Which is awesome, excellent. Just every cliche that we could use came back out, and from there we were able to jump into breakout groups, and Alana and I were sitting sort of discussing how mental health is way more important to us than this really interesting talk. And you know, jumping into those chat groups was just more than we were willing to put on the line. So we left it there. But Alana, was there anything else of notes wise that you wanted to bring out?
I did, yeah. So from that couple's presentation, you know, they were talking about how people are not committing to marriage and having children. You know, they need to include faith and God in their relationship. You know, and they kept going on. She was telling the story, and I'm not being disrespectful to these people, you know, because at the end of the day, that's their life, that's their story, that's what they believe. But for me, then again, the brain gets ticking. I'm thinking, right, okay. So they talk about, you know, the story of, you know, and I had to pray, and, you know, I had to get that peaceful feeling, and I had to know that was the right one through God. And so my brain then starts thinking, but wait a minute, you know, if it's true that God tells you if that's the right person or not, then why is the divorce rate in the church what it is? Because loads of people get divorced within the church and out with the church. But if you're telling me that God has given you that answer to say this is the person you should marry, then shouldn't it be for life? So I guess that's just my little, you know, ex-mo part coming in. But again, I think for me, there's such an emphasis put on marriage, growing up throughout your whole years, marriage, you know, and doing this very, again, respectfully, not, you know, but again, it comes back to, for me, that, you know, we're so sexually deprived within the church and so shamed upon our natural instincts to what our body desires to do. You know, you're not allowed to do this, blah, 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 which I don't think, I'm not going to say anyway. But I think, no, I was just going to say, I don't believe that, you know, I've said it before, that people don't do it, even in the church, you know what happens. But I think, you know, I think there's such a rush because they come back off missions and they just so want to get married so they can have sex. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason for everyone, but, you know, I would say a big part of it is that. And that's why, in my opinion, looking now, marriages are not working for various reasons. But I think a big part of that is because people are finding they're not sexually compatible. And that's a big thing for a lot of people in a relationship. So, you know, this is where my other side of it comes in, you know, why shouldn't you have a phased marriage? You know, get to know each other, you know. But
one thing that I'd like to bring out too, you know, I wasn't going to talk about the things that this really lovely couple were talking about. Just simply because, you know, life is too short and mental health is too fragile. But there is an idea that, you know, that they did mention that they think the ideal, you know, it should be a 50-50 situation marriage. Yeah. You know, we have to be equally yoked, you know, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, this can we talk about that for a second? You know, this
can I just quickly share this? I'm laughing because in my notes I wrote down spouses have to be equal partners in home and family, and then in brackets I put no, they are not. Because I was just like, no, that's in the church. That's not how it happens. Maybe for some people, you know, I remember she said, which I thought was really, really good, and I thought that's how it should be. She said that she made it, I keep saying she because I can't remember her name, Dominica, I think it was. Like, she kept saying, you know, how she had to have that conversation with him, you know, about how their relationship was going to work. And I think possibly because she's like, I'm not having the kind of relationship that years ago, women in the home, you know, blah, blah, blah. So she said they did have thorough discussion. She made it clear to him from the start that this is how, that it was 50-50, equal partnership, equal roles, kind of thing like that. So
I was too busy making vomit noises because I was just so irritated.
But I do think, though, that is healthy and that's the way it should be. I think if more people did that, you know, then maybe, I'm not saying that's the only reason marriages fail, but I think there would be a better basis then for the marriage to maybe continue to work, because you've made clear from the start that this is how I feel about marriage. If you have differing opinions, then maybe we're not right for each other.
Okay, putting this out there, is divorce that bad?
Do you mean, I mean, is that a bad thing?
It's heartbreaking when people go through the trauma of divorce. And
Peter's probably the one to ask about that because he's been divorced.
Is it awful to have higher divorce rates? Could we accept that we're not always all going to get on all the time for our whole life and that it's okay? Is that, Peter?
Well, my divorce was a massive liberation. I fought it hard. You know, I wasn't going to give up. And my wife, in a sense, had more sense about it. She'd really moved on to other places and things. So I had to be prized off like a limpet. But when that time, when
bless
it
you.
finally happened, I was incredibly grateful, because we had become very dysfunctional in our relationship. We were harming each other. It wasn't working. It would have been far worse to stay together for both of our mental health than anyone else watching us. And we had, 6 really good years initially. Challenges happen, people change. So something that sort of was, you commented on that couple talking about, just infuriates me. It's this idea that people are being casual about getting married, and then divorce is too easy. Like, that's not what happens. And you have this narrative in the church that just gets repeated over and over. So it becomes their default mode thinking. They don't look at any actual evidence. They don't talk to people who got divorced. I've heard talk after talk in church condemning the world's laxness about marriage, because these people just aren't trying hard enough, or they wouldn't get divorced.
Do you remember
And
when the
it's like,
song
are
came
you,
out? What was the song? I know the little chapel on the boulevard we can go. That one, where they, I think I want to marry you. That song. Okay, people freaking out in my ward because it was about, we can just get married and just get divorced. Freaking out about it. Las Vegas, look what you did.
And famously, Mormons are famous for doing that. Young horny missionaries going, people have tried to research how real this is, but there must have been a few times where people even talk about, on their mission, they went off, got married, had wild sex for a week, and then got an annulment or something. I don't know how real that is, but I was just looking at some data. 69% of men, this is in America, and 76% of women have been married at least once over 15.
I haven't.
So people love marriage. People get married and they do it. They want it to work. No one goes through all that hassle on a whim. I mean, unless they're really stupid. Like, it would be a tiny percentage of people who are that ditzy. And my goodness, church culture encourages that, for people to just assume they've everything's going to be perfect and romantic, and they've had a spiritual witness that the person is who they should marry at age 18 or whatever. They should just go for it and everything will be fine. God will make it work. And you have general authorities saying, well, really, anyone could get married with the gospel in your life. You'll just make it work, which also speaks to how desiccated their own marriages were. If that's all they're offering in the sense of a depth of relationship, it kind of reveals more about themselves and the marriages they've ended up in than it does about anyone else. It's absolute nonsense. People don't get divorced on whim. It is painful. It's difficult. It's a failure. It's the end of something. There could be children involved. It's this complete nonsense that the world out there isn't really trying. I mean, it's just ludicrous. And it's not looking at the real
holding up
causes
divorce
these
to
problems.
celebrate, relationship breakdowns. That's, I'm a child of divorce too. It sucks. It's awful. Charlie and I, we spoke about it in the podcast. In fact, have we, Alana, have we had a chat about this on the podcast? Charlie and I separated twice, and not just for 5 minutes. We've been married now for 25 years, but there's a lot to it. But I think celebrating the fact that women especially can access divorce, and that you don't have to stay in a marriage which is unsafe, unstable, or that if you divorce, your world will not end. Your children's world will not end. It might feel like that because you have to, all of the trauma and pain that comes with that. But I think it's more complicated. The other massive thing that he spoke about that I think is really important, and it might be worth sort of maybe as the final thing we'll share from
I just have a wee thing, if that's all right.
Just in this point he talked about maternal education. Now, let me just check. That was Spencer James was talking about the best indicator for how successful children will be, how mentally, emotionally healthy children are going to be is maternal education. And
See, I wrote
was
down here,
wonderful.
but I didn't write who said it. Allow the mum to get an education.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yes, I took that well, but at the same time, like, allow them. Like, we have to be allowed to, you know, like, I don't need your permission to get an education. But again, in the church, it's very common that the women put their education on hold to become mothers and wives.
Yeah, and obviously the countries that exist, the maternal education is not, or you know, women and girls are not being educated, and that's something that's important to see successful families.
Yeah.
Anything else you've got,
anyway,
Alana?
Yeah, well, I think, remember these few points, you kept getting booted out, remember? And my notes, I'm quite sporadic with my notes, and they make sense to me at the time, but then sometimes reading back, I'm like, I can't. So I'm sure this was Spencer James, and I can't really remember what he was talking about. But I wrote this phrase down. I was like, you just let me down, Patel. You just let me down. He had said something along the line of, I believe not all family types should be encouraged. Now, I can't remember if there was a context to that or if that was just what he said, but I just thought, really?
Spencer James was not my homie. He was a bit of a bam at times.
He also said, now I wrote this down, I can't remember exactly word for word. I was trying to scribble down. I'm not the fastest writer. But again, I'm thinking, you know, when he went on, as he's saying it at first, I thought, I don't agree with this. But he's saying compared to abusive marriages. But I just didn't agree with, you know, it's again all this back to the church. Like, so what are you saying about people who are not in the church? Are you saying their families, you know? So he was saying, basically, he started going on about covenant keeping, tithe paying, calling, doing people have happier children compared to abusive marriages. And he didn't necessarily mean by physically abusive, you know, just mental abuse or anything. But again, I just wish we would come away from this whole, why can't you just say people who are kind to one another, who support one another, why does it always need to come back to this? In my mind, now I could be wrong, this might just be how I'm thinking, but why does it always need to come back to, it's only if you're covenant keeping, tithe paying, calling, doing, that you're going to have happier children? So what about everyone else out in the world?
I don't think he presented any data on that.
It's the wrong way round.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's the wrong way round
because
those are symptoms.
Who don't do those things.
Yeah.
When the actual
and as well as that,
research was presented, people, you know, were anxious about it. Were a bit, you know. Then you've got a guy from BYU who sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and that sounds like the kind of thing that we can lap up. We can hold on to that. And you know, my point being, we've all attended a presentation where we've heard these wonderful messages, but they're not necessarily messages people are prepared to listen to. And then you hear something like that. There was no data that was being presented on that. Yeah, sorry, Peter, I interrupted you because I got mad. Sorry.
Well, those things are symptoms, aren't they? This is the fundamental error these pseudo-scientists make in trying to make dogmatic, uninformed traditions in our culture sound real. It's not the fact that you got married in the temple and made covenants and pay your tithing that makes you a better parent. It is, if you have a stable home life and are reasonably prosperous, you will then be able to afford to pay tithing. You will then be turning up to church on a Sunday. Those are symptoms, not causes, and they always get this mixed up. Rather than focusing on what actually makes a strong relationship and healthy mental health and those skills, for a church that's desperately all about marriage, they do zero training about how to do marriage. Even when we actually had manuals for the women and men that focused on family life, which we don't now, they took those all away. Now we're just regurgitating conference talks, but we used to at least have manuals for Relief Society and for the priesthood that focused on the role of a woman in family life and marriage, and the role of a man. And men were given a sense of their duty, being focused in the home and being responsible and present, and all of that. We get none of that now. You don't hear it ever at church, except the occasional rare talk, and I haven't heard one of those for years. So we don't do it anymore. They've actually got worse. We used to at least have this idea of men being taught how to be in the home, to be husbands, to be fathers, to be present, to be caretakers of their family. and you get almost nothing about that now. If you joined the church 5 years ago, you've never heard any of it. So this hypocrisy again, that they keep saying the Mormons have got it right, but they don't. And the model that they sell is a recipe for the disaster. If young people have time for man and woman to get education or establish in a career, whether they're middle class or working class or whatever, and come together with a bit of maturity, some life experience away from home as an independent human, to have found themselves, they come together in a marriage from a much healthier perspective and able to protect and defend themselves more if there are problems in that marriage. The model that the church, and if the woman then, and it is a huge burden to raise children, if you're going to have children, it will knock most women out of workplaces or career progression, and to some extent it is a big sacrifice, but at least if they've got qualifications, they can come back to those later and progress or a foothold in a career. And when half of marriages, including in the church, end in divorce, they've got some form of income. The model these apostles keep selling is don't wait those 2 extra years. It's hush, race, hurry up, off the plane and off your mission and up the aisle. Don't wait, children. And literally the Rasbans and Renlands.
Don't put off children for education. That's what I remember being taught.
Yes. And which means the woman always is the one who will sacrifice. But then it's terrible for the dads as well, because they have to work extra hours to support the family. They never see their wife and children, while also getting a decent qualification to become a breadwinner, able to afford a family on their first salary. I mean, it's insane, particularly with the living costs today, which they don't factor in. And the fact that Brigham Young universities are a fraction of the price of most university. So the model they sell is a respite. You are more likely to get divorced if you marry young, if you have children young, and if you have financial problems. And
Peter,
those three things are guaranteed by following their script.
Okay, I've got 2 questions for you. So obviously the other thing that's worth noting there is we're talking about a particular type of family, so that when gender or sexual orientation doesn't fit that, it's just it's worth keeping it in mind. That's a very cisgendered a view of marriage, which is the only one that is presented to us in the church. And I loved the fact that in this presentation, it was presented as not being a threat. And I think if we could hear more of, you don't have to be scared of this stuff. I would just love to see what that would look like. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, here we saw again, in real time, the tension between academics, people who presented as academics, and church leadership and the standard sort of TBM member. Could you maybe share some thoughts on, I was hopeful hearing some academic research being presented in this really, we're finally getting to hear what we need to hear at church, and is this the future? Can you talk a little bit about that tension? Could we expect to see more of this, do you think? Or are we going to be stuck in members holding ourselves back and pushing up against the academia?
I think we're seeing this already play out in the sense of history. The internet has changed everything. You can't hide the truth anymore. So the academics can have a huge voice, because as soon as you click online to research something, you can find the real data. You can find the reality. You can burst that bubble really fast, that cultural bubble that the church has spun around everyone's brains about all kinds of things, including family life. So they can't hold back the tide anymore, because the people will respect the data, and it's overwhelming and it's obvious. And they are now seeing and meeting legally married same-sex couples who are doing fine and raising their kids and haven't got any worse rates of divorce than everyone else. So that narrative that the kids are going to be a disaster and it's not a real marriage is clearly nonsense. And we can see that now. So the more, we have more diverse families accepted legally, that eventually they'll have to, that illusion collapses. But I think what is going to have to happen is we've got to, in a sense, triangulate. You've got the scientific research data you're talking about from the academics about what really makes healthy family life. And the church has this school of family life at Young University that I presume some of these people came from. But you also have, I think what also has to happen is a reality check about what the religion says about family life. This model that the family proclamation tries to turn into scripture and make holy is a new invention in so many components. It is just an expression of a particular middle class, socially conservative point of view in American culture, mainly. Because it's got so many flaws in it. For a start, it's Mormons saying this, and Mormons did marriage every which way but normal. They did polyandry with Joseph Smith and others being sealed to other men's wives, faithful men on missions, but he still married himself to their wives, so they had more than one husband. It did polygamy with men being sealed to many women. It did marrying a mother and daughter, which is illegal in the Old Testament. Jesus Christ specifically forbade divorce. He said, unless the marriage was invalid, you make an adulterer of anyone who remarries after divorce. You can't get around that. It's in 2 of the Gospels. This is why the Catholics don't, bless remarriages. They're not making it up out of thin air. It's Jesus said it according to the Bible. So we have to have some pretty radical reappraisal of how much of what's recorded of Jesus saying do we even think of, and we definitely don't practice it. Mormons have always been into divorce. I mean, it's a huge part of the polygamy arrangements, often for their convenience. So that's something screaming in the actual scriptures. If they want to pretend this is a religious model, that this model of marriage is God's will, we're breaking all the rules of it. Left, right, and centre. We've broken all the polygamy rules. Every rule in Doctrine and Covenants 132 for polygamy, and it's a dysfunctional nightmare if you read it through. Joseph broke all of them. So we don't even follow their own made up rules. And they don't follow what Jesus said about divorce, because we accept divorce, thank goodness. They are hypocrites in all their criticisms of same-sex marriage, because the same arguments were used against what the Mormons did. So I think it's a three-parter. These general authorities, with their worldview based on their 1950s upbringing in post-war middle-class America, they're wrong on both fronts. They're wrong religiously, and they can't deal with that, and we can destroy their narrative on that basis. And they're wrong by the scientific evidence and research. So there's a huge conversation to be had here. But I think the extra ingredient that will be powerful is coming at it from a religious point of view as well. Jesus said nothing in the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants. There's not a verse anywhere about homosexuality in either of those books. And the Book of Mormon is the most perfect book ever written and has the fullness of the gospel. We don't need the homophobia to have the fullness of the gospel.
Okay,
so their
I'm gonna ask
religious
a final
foundation
question.
is also wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, can I just apologize to the audience? My husband brought me a new microphone for Christmas, and I think it's so sensitive it picks up actual space waves, and the dog just loves to I don't know, get his ear time. So I'm really sorry if that was super distracting. I'll try to be more aware for future. But what I wanted to ask was so both of you, I'm sure, will be aware of, and I think it was a wonderful host of Mormonism Live who'd alerted us all to this last night. Do you want to maybe mention the disclaimer that has appeared on one of the talks? Peter, have you had the chance to have a look at that? Alana, have you still got the link?
I've not heard anything.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what, Maven, if you're still in the chat and you want to fill us in, but while Alana's looking that up, I think it's hugely important to remember that the idea, like Peter's saying, the idea that we are trying to hold on to is from a specific time in a specific place. And, you know, it doesn't reflect how families look worldwide necessarily. It can,
No.
but, you know, and so with reference to a specific talk that Alana's just going to shout out right now, if you're desperate to know, jump onto RFM or Bilgo's Facebook
The funny
page.
thing about this was Jane sent me the talk and said, this is interesting. But I had already clicked on the link to read the article before she sent the next bit, which said about the disclaimer. So I sat and read the whole talk, not realising it was only about the disclaimer. So it was quite funny.
Okay, you got it?
Yep. Editor's note, January 2022. Articles in the magazine's archive may reflect practices and language of an earlier time. More current messages from the magazines on the relationship between husbands and wives include spiritual treasures and achieving oneness in marriage. See also marriage and gospel topics. And this was the talk called Strengthening the Patriarchal Order in the Home by Brent A. Barlow.
Which was from February 1973, and it's on RFM's Facebook page. Thank you for breaking that. Isn't that huge?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but hey, can I just say something from a male's point of view? Is they've screwed over the men as well. We usually have these narratives of how it's this is all dysfunctional for women. As Maven mentioned, she said she lost, I think it was her saying she lost a rental in a property,
Yep.
in part in a situation where a man was
that is
trying
Queen
to earn enough.
Maven to you, just to
Yes.
Maven.
Queen
is
Maven.
our, thank you.
Because he was trying to live this ideal and earn enough money to support a wife and children. You can't do it in Britain, and Utah property prices are through the roof now. The house prices have quadrupled in the last 20 years. Like the percentage of a salary that a house costs now is insane. You have to have both people earning, even to have a hope of getting on the property ladder. And renting is more expensive than paying a mortgage in our country. And this is being replicated across the developed world. So the model here is simply unrealistic, and the guilt they impose on men as well as women, while at the same time, as I said earlier, removing any sense of guidance or positivity about a man's role in the home. When they introduced the Come Follow Me program of a home-centered church, they said almost nothing about men doing this. And in the past, the model for a patriarch in the home had been, I think, a reasonable one. Look, we accept that the women are doing most of the practical organising and hands-on stuff with young children. That's just the way it has to be in most families. But man, don't just say your role, at least, is to be responsible for the spiritual life of your home. You should lead. You should lead family prayer, scripture study, take an interest in your children. Be that kind of support. Obviously, we'd say today, do other, be equal in all of these things. But I was really shocked that they didn't give a man any kind of role in that spiritual leading. So they're expecting the mums now in the Come Follow Me model to not only be doing all the practice and the homemaking and nurturing the children while the men are off at work. When the men come back, they're also expecting the women to lead the worship, to lead the study. They model after model of women taking on this duty. And they're frazzled. There's a lot of women saying, I can't do all of this as well. Where's the men in this? And there is no narrative anymore. They're ignoring them. And it's like men have got carte blanche to do whatever, and all the guilt and the obligations and expectations are being really predominantly piled onto women now in the current First Presidency's model of family life, post family proclamation. And I think this is why so many women are becoming disillusioned. I think I think we can have win-wins. We can not have sex outside marriage. Let's go with that. But let's not. The reality in the church is that there are 100 active women for every 70 active men. So that means right from the get-go, 30% of all LDS women cannot marry in the temple. They can't. It will never happen. 30%. Plus, how many of those men would you want to marry? So at least 50%, assuming the women are doing a bit better, are just not going to find a marriage in that. What can't we just have a positive view of them marrying a non-member of the church? Can't we just embrace that? I mean, flirt to converts, you got a far better chance of bringing them into the church. Marry them,
just going back to Mormon Freedom Fairy's comment where she said Spencer W. Kimball said you could marry anyone in the church and make it work. And the alarm bells went off, and I'm like, that sounds just like what my mum said. And I'm thinking, is this where she's got this from? Because my mum's always said, you don't have to love someone to marry them. My mum said, you could marry anyone, you could grow to love them. But I don't believe that, because you've got to have an attraction there of some sort for it to truly work. But according to my mum, and that's when I seen that comment, I thought, is this possibly where my mum's got this ideal from?
I'm going to take us to closing comments. My loves. So if you just
I need to go
have a think, and I'm going to come to both of you in a second. But I think what I want to share, I guess, about my experience of family really hadn't changed, other than give me a little bit of hope that there are some prevailing attitudes that we might hear a bit more positivity starting to filter through in the church, that somehow we might be ready to open things up and move on. My role within my family is complicated. I am tired. I don't want to do it. I don't want to have the amount of responsibility placed upon my shoulders. All I want to do is worship God in peace and blooming quiet without having to, drag everyone to the celestial kingdom. It's not a sustainable life. I want to be angry. I want to, have breaks. I want to enjoy every second with my family without having to feel that I have to account for it somehow, that I am owing people this. I want to be with my family because they're the people that I like to be with, and that I love them, but not out of this constant sense of duty and that it's all or nothing. If anything happens to me, my family are screwed. According to the church, there's no hope, and they are so much more perfect than that. Yeah, exactly. So I have hope. And I'm excited about the possibilities. When someone suggests possibilities, that's what gets me. That's what gets me going a little bit. So yes, I'm gonna come to Peter first. Do you want to share some final thoughts then? What did you think about what you've heard?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, amazing. It is, but it is this same clash between people who are more informed. On a positive, which I haven't mentioned yet, my mum trained as a Relate counsellor. Here in Britain, Relate is the major, used to be marriage guidance counselling, but relationship counselling charity. And then she worked for several years as one of the church's counsellors. And she and other professional counsellors in the church do have a network. They've started to train bishops up to stop thinking they can fix everyone's marital problems and instead refer people to professionals. That's been a game-changing improvement over the last couple of decades. And then finally, this big change happened again, I think about 10 years ago, where the manuals, the training for the marriage courses in the church, when they eventually get round to getting you on one, used to just be full of absolute nonsense by random general authorities speaking their mind going back centuries. They got the scholars of the School of Family Life to write this manual, and suddenly it was professional, and it's good. And my mum was really impressed with it, having had her professional training. She was like, at last we got a manual we can work with. And that was because they listened to the academics and trusted them at last. To actually know what they're talking about, to do evidence-based advice and guidance, and concepts of how relationships and families can be healthy, rather than the wild guesses of people. And when you actually research the marriages of some of the general authorities, they were horrific. They were adulterous, some of them. They were abusive. Joseph F. Smith, whose family we saw there, was often violent towards his wife. I've recently discovered by doing some historical research. And often, like, the police were called sometimes because he was freaking out in the street. So this illusion and the random opinions of these men who didn't know what they're talking about in everything, in church history, in family life, in how we teach and think about the scriptures, all the things that are becoming dysfunctional tensions between reality and what the church culture and leadership insists is the only truth, as we heard from President Nelson and his wife. When you listen to the academics, it works. Things get better. Bring together the best of both worlds. We can have a win-win, but it is essential to be a rational faith and to base it on listening to real people, their real lives, and we can do better. But the church gets there after decades of getting it wrong and breaking families and losing huge numbers of members. They can't keep dragging this far behind the curve. They're going to have to be brave, ordain women, LGBTQ equality in the temple, and they're going to have to do it very soon. They're going to have to stop this thing of being 30 years behind the world. They're going to have to get ahead of that game, or the church is toast. And if they want to keep talking about family, they need to talk about real life and real families.
Life.
And you can still have the church's values and make that work. There is a win-win.
Absolutely. So speaking of real family life,
if I'm sorry, I forget sometimes I'm on the podcast and I'm probably sitting raging at her because she's supposed to be in her bed.
No, you don't get to be sorry because that's how our podcasts work. It's real life. We have our families with us, and at any point we could have to leave to go and deal with them, yell at them, give them a hug, whatever it is.
I think if we looked back all the podcasts, there's bound to be at least once throughout every podcast where I'm like,
we should do a highlights reel. We definitely need one. Okay, so give me some final thoughts if you're up for it.
Well, I guess the main thing I have to say, really, just echoing our lovely Wouter van Beek, and sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Mr. Beek. I do think we need to take away the idea of this ideal family, because it puts so much pressure. Like I said, like me being not the ideal family, being a single parent with my daughter, not being married, not having a stable home, I suppose, not having a priesthood holder in the home, all these things that come along with, being in your own in the church, and, I'm not going to lie, is it hard being a single parent? Absolutely. And I'm sorry for saying that if that offends anyone. It's hard, it's exhausting, it's tiring. I'm trying to play mum and dad. My daughter didn't see her dad for 3 years, so I did it alone for 3 years. You're trying to play all the roles, you're trying to fulfill all their needs. You kind of get forgotten about for a time. Would I change it? Probably not. But like Jane, there are times where I'm like, I just can't be a mum today. I don't say this for sympathy. I have a condition called fibromyalgia, which, I also have mental health, as most people know. So it is hard, and again, there's times when I do need to reach out for help. My mum's had to take Daisy a bit extra, or, I've had to say, Jane, I'm struggling. James came, bless her, and helped me put Daisy to bed so that I can just take a break for a change, because you're doing that same routine all the time, and it is hard. And anyone who is on, and even, I'm saying me being on my own, there's people who are married who find it hard because, like, being a mother is a lot of the responsibility is on you to do those things, because as you say, Peter, the men are out working bloody hard to bring the income in to survive through life. I'm sorry, I realise sometimes to us in the UK that's not swearing, so I apologise if in America that's classed as swearing or anything. I just realise but I mean, honestly, putting it all out there, being a mum's been so hard for me this past 6 weeks. I've been ill with a bad cold. I had COVID over Christmas. My fibro's been playing up. Pain levels haven't been great. And I literally, about 6-7 hours ago, took my Christmas tree down. Word of a lie. And that's just life for me. My window cleaner was here the other day and he's probably thinking, right, hen, Christmas finished a month ago. Like, you know, but that's just life for me being a mum. My house is a bit of a mess right now, again, due to being unwell and not being able to do it. And I'm hard on myself all the time. But Jane will remind me, but you're doing it all yourself. You're doing what's normally a couple of people's job on your own. And I have to remind myself of that. But I think, yeah, family's important. Absolutely. Family is important. But I just think the church needs to come away from this whole, again, for me, it comes back to not feeling good enough because I'm not this typical family in the church. I'm not married. You know, I did it wrong. I had sex out with marriage. I had a child, you know. I don't regret it one bit. I love my daughter so much. I would die for her tomorrow. You know, but I just think, again, it's trying to, for me, the biggest and hardest part of it is trying to come away from all these things that I'm now realising for me doesn't need to be, if that makes any sense at all. Like all the things that I've been conditioned with in the church about the ideal family, about all these things, it's trying to change my thinking to realise that I am enough. I am an ideal family. My family's ideal for me. You know, would I love to be married one day? Absolutely. I would love to have the support, the help. But again, I'm not just going to jump into something that isn't right for me just to have that ideal family. Sorry if that was a bit of a rabble.
No, it's sharing how you feel, and that's what we don't get to do often enough. Hey, that's why we started the podcast. So thank you for being vulnerable. I think it always comes back to, I think, for women and, you know, for the church, the idea of families, it's the perfectionism. It's the putting women and our roles on a pedestal. And, you know, no one can doubt that we are our children's, the centre of our children's whole worlds. And isn't that the best feeling?
Absolutely.
But also,
it can be the worst feeling sometimes. Yeah.
It is, to be someone's whole world is a tremendous amount of responsibility, and it is suffocating and painful and complicated and beautiful.
It's funny how it can be all of these things, even though some of it's good and some of it's bad. It's so strange. Because like that, like Daisy, like you said, suffocating. I've used that word a few times to Jane. Like my little girl has a bit of anxiety sometimes about being away from me. And it got to the point I did feel suffocated. And I had to say to Dad, you need to stop her calling me when she's at your house. She goes to Dad's for a few hours after school on a Monday and Wednesday. But I wasn't getting the break because it was phone. And I'm like, you are the parent. I tell her not to do it. I'm like, but you're the parent. You need to say, do not call your mum, you know. But yeah.
So I think if we can have messy, complicated families, that would be so good, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be okay with us just acknowledging this is what it is? And, you know, we can
just quickly, I know we're trying to wrap up, and I'm sorry I did say I didn't want to go on long tonight, but I was just thinking about you saying, you know, about, you know, the church and the way it teaches you, you know, the important role of women when you're growing up. And, you know, see, looking back on that, at the time, I didn't think anything of that. It was the norm. But see now, I'm like, no, this needs to stop. The focus on women being mothers and wives needs to stop. It needs to stop. Women are every bit as important. Equality, they should be able to get their education. Even if you're married to someone, get their education. And then if they want to become mums, as you say, Peter, it's having that thing to fall back on if you so wish to be a mother. But there are some mums who still need that part to work. So listen up, church.
Listen up, church. Okay.
We're telling you.
So I want to ask, Peter, what are you up to next? What you doing?
Okay, so I think tomorrow night we're going to be looking at Wendy Nelson's talk in the broadcast to Europe in particular. It's so just packed with the state of mind of these people at the top. Extremely disturbing, completely bonkers, just like entertaining on that level.
Yeah.
But super important because she is the major influence on her husband, the prophet. So that's going to be really interesting. I'm working on 3 episodes of my podcast, Processing the British Rescue, looking at the Swedish rescue, the Boise rescue, the British rescue, what the apostles said, also what Keith Erickson, the historian, said. I'm going to have to add loads of this stuff now because this is more of the same. It's kind of the follow-up. So it's expanding. I'm filming it now. So I'm going into all films and watching audio, which takes ages and my hair keeps changing. But then I'm going to do Mormon Stories, the movie for not Mormon Civil War, the movie for Mormon episode. I'm going to film on location. It's going to be amazing. You'll see lots of bits of Britain.
Oh,
And
brilliant.
I'm hoping it'll be awesome. So I'll get you guys involved in that as well.
That sounds so fun. And
So
as for us next week, we're going to be back with some pretty cool guests over the next couple of weeks. Some pretty special discussions. And then I think Alana and I are going to do a temple preparation class. So watch this space. We will see you all tomorrow night over on Nemo the Mormons channel. Join us there at 8:30 p.m. We are going to have so much fun. And apart from that, we bless your journey. Have a great night, everyone. Good night.
Good night, everyone.